Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to talk best ball rankings today. I'm wearing my Carolina sweatshirt because it's the first day of the NCAA tournament, Jared, but we're focused on other things. We're already drafting fantasy football teams, best ball in particular this time of year. And I like him better in best ball has become a cliche in fantasy football in recent years, and for good reason, because it's become kind of this catch-all for just fantasy players who aren't irrelevant, but they're really inconsistent. So people just tend to say, I like that guy better in best ball. We're looking for more than just volatile players. It's about the ceiling potential. That's the key here, not the variance itself, right?
I think we all know those volatile players get boosts in best ball, right? I think the tricky thing now and what hasn't really been solved yet is what makes a player more volatile. How can we better project players that are going to have that volatility in the coming season? So that's what we've been focused on. We'll continue to focus on, and I think we'll talk a little bit about today.
And of course, we're primarily focused on the ceiling aspect. We have those ceiling projections. We'll get further into that when we talk about the players. It's important, of course, because winning in best ball is just different than trying to win in typical single fantasy leagues. When people talk about best ball at this point, they're usually talking about best ball tournaments. You can do single league best ball, but it's a lot more common at this point to be in larger field tournaments where we are targeting that ultimate upside, both from individual players and from our teams. Jared, why do best ball rankings need to be different from standard traditional fantasy football rankings?
Well, it's a different format, right? I mean, I think in particular, how your starting lineup is cobbled together is different in best ball. In best ball, you're getting your optimal lineup each week after the games are played versus in a standard redraft league, you're picking your starters before the games kick off. As we said, that difference in best ball rewards volatility. The bad scores don't hurt as much because they're ideally not in your starting lineup. The big scores from players are more valuable because they're guaranteed to be in your starting lineup. If your wide receiver 5 goes off in best ball, he's going to be in your starting lineup, whereas, he's not going to be in your starting lineup in redraft unless you were dealing with injuries and bye weeks and that type of stuff. So it just makes more volatile players more valuable in best ball rankings.
Right. You're still not just, chasing as many volatile players as you can. You're chasing upside and worrying less about the downside. And when you set your draft war room to best ball mode, we apply best ball factor to the player projections that are already customizing your rankings to fit the format that you're drafting in. That best ball factor boosts players, as we're talking about, who sport that high weekly upside, but also the downside to bust in a given week. So, like I said, not just volatility, but guys who can really score big, and we don't want to worry so much the weeks that they don't. We want to draft in a way that leverages that upside with less worry about the downside risk in other weeks. What the best ball factor does for the draft war room is quantify that better in best ball rather than just like expressing an opinion about the way a player scores his points. And as you get later into your draft, upside mode kicks in. So we automatically give even more weight to those ceiling projections because the later you get in your draft, as we've talked about on multiple shows already this year, the more you want to target that upside, the more you're chasing what is possible. And Jared, we're going to be introducing something else today that looks beyond what is possible and kind of evaluates what has happened, what we saw was possible last year that maybe we knew or didn't know heading into the season. Tell me about what best ball scoring value is going to do for us.
I think, one good way to help predict volatility going forward is just to look at which players were most and least volatile in the past. So we've developed this best ball scoring value where basically we're looking at each player's weekly fantasy point total and sticking it in a bucket at that position. So for example, at running back, we found the point values that equate to a top 50 finish at running back, a top 36 finish, top 24, top 12, top 5, and top 1. And then at that point, we figure out how many of each of those weeks each player had. So just using an example, Saquon Barkley last year, looking at his point totals by week, he had 16 top 50 weeks, 16 top 36 weeks, 13 top 24 weeks, 10 top 12 weeks, 7 top 5 weeks, and 5 top 1 weeks. We're then assigning a weight to each of those buckets to come up with a final best ball value score for each player. And again, this essentially is just telling us how valuable that player was versus others at his position in best ball. Going back to Saquon as an example, his best ball scoring value is 3.88. That essentially means he was 3.88 times more valuable than the average running back in best ball, in the best ball format. So again, we're looking at those values. We have them dating back to 2019 now, and it's a big part of these best ball factors you were talking about, Matt, that move guys up and down the best ball rankings on Draft Sharks.
This new metric is going to help inform our best ball factor in the best ball draft war room. Like Jared said, we're looking at data going back to 2019. Today, we're going to focus on the top performers from 2024, look at what that performance meant and what it should mean for our drafting in 2025 and beyond. We'll certainly be looking even more at these numbers on draftsharks.com, digging more into what it means and trying to make sure that we're not simply overreacting to what did happen last year. We'll also look at some guys who maybe their scoring didn't agree in terms of, their weekly average versus that best ball scoring value, because after all, we're talking about guys that are better in best ball. So let's go position by position, Jared. We'll talk top fives. And at quarterback, we've got, no surprise, Lamar Jackson up top. Joe Burrow, a bit more surprising behind that. Then Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels tied for third. I think at this one starter position, it's worth noting the placement of the players a bit more than it's going to be at the other positions, because Josh Allen, for example, finishing tied for fourth is not great because he was the first quarterback off the board. That said, he's been terrific for best ball teams over the past 5 years. Like, for his previous 4 seasons were among the best quarterback scoring seasons in our best ball scoring value.
Yeah, Allen's probably the most interesting guy to me at the top of this list because, like you said, Matt, he earned a 2.13 best ball scoring value this past season. He was at 2.98 or better in each of his previous 4 seasons. So I think we're going to see closer to what we saw last year going forward. I just think that old Josh Allen, just the Bills don't want him to be that. The team has gone more run heavy. He's doing a bit less of the design rushing stuff. So he's interesting in that, I think in the past, I always viewed him as, is the best ball quarterback because of that spike week potential. I'm not sure we're going to get that going forward. Like you said, Matt, Lamar Jackson, easily the most valuable quarterback in best ball last year. I think the gap between him and the rest of the guys, even bigger than if you just look at the straight, fantasy points per game numbers, a 3.77 best ball scoring value from Lamar Jackson last year. That was the third best by any quarterback since 2019. Lamar Jackson last year led all quarterbacks in top 12 scoring weeks, top 5 scoring weeks, and top 1 scoring weeks. He was, by far the most valuable quarterback to have in best ball.
And he also has the best season within that data from 2019. His score that year, number 1 overall. I think that the takeaway here should not be, oh, I should get Lamar Jackson because he's awesome, or even I should get Josh Allen because he's been awesome more often than he's not been awesome. I think we need to look at what factors propelled those players to those spots. For Lamar Jackson, those 2 years where he's been so far above the rest of the pack, he has thrown a lot of touchdown passes, a higher rate than over the course of his career. So my takeaway is not so much targeting Lamar Jackson, but being wary of that boost that high TD rate gives you. And I think that's similar with Joe Burrow last year, talked about him being number 2, similar with Baker Mayfield being up in the top 5. I think those are a couple of guys where you should expect the touchdown rate to come down a bit. And then on the other side, we can look for quarterbacks who had a lower touchdown rate, either than they have historically or than we might expect versus the rest of their statistics. Those can be guys that maybe we target next year looking for the next Baker Mayfield, or, starting at a higher level looking for that next Joe Burrow that might be 7th but can finish 3rd.
Yeah, for sure. And if we look at just, again, the data going back to 2019 at quarterback and just look at, who is at the very top of the list as far as best ball scoring value, it is a bunch of Lamar Jacksons, again, a bunch of Josh Allens, Jalen Hurts up there. And then interspersed, there's a Dak Prescott, there's an Aaron Rodgers, there's a Patrick Mahomes. So to me, that the 2 ways you can finish near the top of these rankings, 1 is be a running quarterback, 2, have an uber efficient season, especially when it comes to passing touchdowns. Now, the rushing is a lot easier to predict than the high passing touchdown rate, the high efficiency stuff. That's very difficult to project. I think someone like Burrow, who's done it a bunch of years, you can feel safer about him doing it, but it's tough to project that. So not a surprising takeaway, but it is the rushing quarterbacks that have the best chance to be the true difference makers in best ball.
Yeah. And, be wary of a quarterback who does his scoring like Burrow if he's going super early. If Joe Burrow's the 3rd quarterback off the board, like we saw with Mahomes last year, then you need to be wary of him at that cost. I thought it was also interesting from the high-end data at quarterback there's not a whole lot of doing it year over year. Like I talked about Lamar Jackson's top 2 seasons being spread apart. His 2020 was up there as well. So that's interspersed, but it also wasn't to the level of 2019, 2024. So there is volatility here. Josh Allen's the guy that hasn't been as volatile because he does do the passing scoring and the rushing scoring every single season.
Yeah, Allen has 4 of the top 12 seasons in best ball scoring value since 2019 with, again, last year not being a part of that. So, I don't know, maybe, not that he's going cheap in best ball drafts right now, but historically he's better in best ball than he was this past season. So maybe you kind of bet on him bouncing back to that type of production in 2025.
Running backs, the top 5 overall, we had Saquon Barkley, no surprise, then Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, and Alvin Kamara. Not a whole lot of surprise there, Jared. Maybe Alvin Kamara surprises people. We've already covered how he outperformed expectations, though.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, Kamara did it with the receiving, which I think is a takeaway for me. I think we'll get to it as we talk about some more of the other outliers at the position. How these running backs are being valuable in best ball might be different than you might expect without looking at the data. Saquon Barkley, 3.88 best ball scoring value, tops at running back by a pretty healthy margin. It's interesting how Saquon did it too. He did not lead running backs in top 12 scoring weeks. That was Jahmyr Gibbs. Saquon did not lead running backs in top 5 scoring weeks. That was Bijan Robinson. But Saquon did it with 5 top 1 scoring weeks, easily most at the position. No other running back had more than 2 top 1 scoring weeks. Actually, Saquon accounted for 26% of the total top 1 scoring weeks on the season at running back. So just those ultra spike weeks is how, Saquon did it for best ball teams last year.
And for me, there are a couple of takeaways in that. One, Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry both benefited from moves to high-end offenses for really the first time in their careers last season. And, as we look at who has that ultimate upside in our drafts, we want to not just look at our projections, but look at guys who have a path like that to something that you can't predict, like the touchdown production of Barkley and Derrick Henry last year. And then maybe you just kind of manually upgrade a player along those lines if you think there is something like that possible in them going forward. You also mentioned how other players had better rates of top 12 and top 5 weeks than Barkley last year. To me, the thing to point to there is the lack of receiving for Barkley versus those other high-end running backs. That can introduce some volatility that might not be clear in the overall scoring that Barkley did last year.
For sure. And I think that's why we're probably a little below consensus right now on Barkley, who he goes, 101 in plenty of fantasy drafts. I think for me, Jamar Chase is easily ahead of him. And then I think you can even make case for Bijan Robinson over Saquon Barkley at the same position, because basically if some of those 5 massive weeks that Barkley had last year just aren't quite as big, again, the fact that he didn't lead in top 12 or top 5 scoring weeks makes him a bit scary if you're taking him at the 101.
Yeah, I actually want to be a little bit low on Barkley versus the market if he's going among the top 2 picks, consistently in drafts. Who are the other outliers that you found here at running back?
This is the interesting thing I want to talk about, something we can, use to our advantage in 2025 and beyond. If the 2 biggest overachievers at, the top end running back area were Josh Jacobs, who was 8th among running backs in total PPR points per game, but 6th in best ball scoring value. And then Kyren Williams, who was 10th in points per game, but 7th in best ball scoring value. And to me, looking at both those players, those are volume-based fantasy producers. They are not the big playbacks that you might expect to jump in these rankings and be more valuable in best ball. It was really, at least last year, it was volume guys. And I think that's instructive as we look ahead. We always talk about, just in general, we want to target volume at running back. And I think that's the same case in best ball. Getting all those touches, that's what leads to more spike week potential, more so than having the ability to, break off a 70-yard touchdown.
Yeah, that's the foundation of RBs don't matter. It's not that it doesn't matter, as we've seen with Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry. It's that volume can boost you more than talent matters at the position. Christian McCaffrey obviously gave us nothing last year, but I don't want to leave the position without talking about him, because he's basically been the Josh Allen at running back. When he's on the field, high impact. And, we'll see about the health heading into the season, but that's why I'm targeting him at his depressed draft price this year. In round 2, typically, I've even taken him around the 1-2 turn, because if Christian McCaffrey is healthy this year, he retains that high end upside that can just dramatically impact a best ball season in particular.
Yeah, McCaffrey owns the 2 best ball scoring values since we've been tracking this, since 2019. Those 2 seasons were in 2019 and 2020. So, long time ago, especially in running back years. But In 2023, just 2 years ago, Christian McCaffrey had the 7th best ball scoring value over this time span, basically just behind Saquon Barkley. So just 2 years ago, McCaffrey had a similar valued season as Saquon Barkley just had. I think that's what makes McCaffrey interesting, at the 1-2 turn in drafts right now.
And then before we get away, I want to go back to Alvin Kamara. I want to remake the point that we made on him before, that another way to look for running backs who can climb into this range is somebody who is having the market already overrate his risk at draft time. We talked about how that was the case with Alvin Kamara last year. We talked about how we failed to find that signal in our 2024 drafts. So that's certainly going to be a signal that I'm looking for in 2025 and beyond. And, like I said, we don't want to just target the players who ranked high in best ball scoring value last year. We want to try to learn the lessons from those finishes to see how we can apply them to the candidates for the upcoming season. To me, Kamara is still a candidate within that same vein.
For sure. And it goes back to volume with Kamara, right? Because he was not super efficient last year. And really with him, it's obviously not the rushing volume, but it's the target volume. And we know in PPR, targets are worth, whatever it is, 2.5 times more than a carry. So all those targets he gets, even if he's not efficient, basically, unless you think those targets are going away in 2025, it's going to be tough for him to, not pay off his ADP pretty handsomely at this point.
It is not too early to see who is overrated, underrated, or just right versus ADP. Our projections are out. We are getting regularly updated best ball ADP from Underdog Fantasy Drafts, and we're combining those factors to display our ADP market index. That shows you who's underrated, who's overrated by our numbers, as well as who is appropriately valued. You can use it to try to help you decide who to target in your drafts. I wouldn't say that people who are overrated are guys you should necessarily fade completely, because when we're building best ball portfolios, we don't want to kick out most players. Most players you should have at least some exposure to, but might be guys that you push down a little bit, that you don't target as much, that you have less exposure to in your overall portfolio. Wide receivers now, top 5. Another non-surprise at the top is Jamar Chase, who's now the top player in most fantasy drafts for 2025. Malik Neighbors, number 2. Justin Jefferson slightly behind him at number 3. Chris Godwin and Puka Nacua behind them. And I think, Jared, that those two guys are probably the most interesting among the top 5, because I don't think that you think about them as top 5 receivers from last year, because they both missed significant time with injury. And so for me, the takeaway here is make sure that you don't overlook a player who did miss that time last year if, when he was on the field, he was awesome, and if he's on track to not be limited by that injury in this coming season.
Yeah, and Puka, like you said, checks in 5th here, and that's even accounting for, I think there were 2 games. One he, I think, left with a concussion, and one he was booted around like halftime. Those are included in here, and that's actually dragging him down a little bit. So Puka was awesome in terms of best ball scoring value. So was Chris Godwin, as you said, Matt, 4th on this list. Only played 8 games last year, but he was top 36 wide receiver in 7 of those 8. He had 3 top 12 scoring weeks, 2 top 5 scoring weeks, 1 top 1 level scoring week. So we'll keep an eye on his health. But obviously, not at an age yet we're really worried about decline. And the Bucks gave him a pretty big deal in free agency, so they're not super worried about the injury, I don't think. So Chris Godwin, to me, is one of the better values in best ball drafts at wide receiver right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to see more on his injury situation, but I'm a little bit comfier with him now after seeing how much the Bucks paid him in free agency than I was before. Other outliers at wide receiver, what'd you find here?
Yeah, so this is interesting to me, because I think the outliers at running back were kind of surprising in terms of archetype. Not the case for me at wide receiver. So if we just look at, to me, 4 of the biggest overachievers when it comes to being more valuable in best ball than they were in just straight points per game: Mike Evans, Terry McLaurin, Devonta Smith, Jamison Williams. Those are 4 guys to me where, not necessarily huge volume, but big play threats, touchdown scoring threats. That archetype, at least last year, is what was more valuable in best ball. And you look at the 3 biggest underachievers: Drake London, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Khalil Shakir. More of the guys who, see nice volume, but it's more short range stuff. Maybe they're not big touchdown scorers in Shakir's case in particular. So to me, this kind of confirms the stereotype we might have about wide receivers, where the types you want to boost a bit in best ball are those types who work more downfield and have, a big role inside the red zone.
It does. Now, within that group, within those 2 groups, I'll say, I think there are more takeaways as well. So one, be wary of a guy who has that type of season as opposed to a guy who has consistently done that. To me, Mike Evans is a guy who has consistently given us more touchdowns than you can typically expect from a receiver for the workload. Terry McLaurin, on the other hand, just had a wildly different season from most of the rest of his seasons in terms of touchdown production versus target share. So I've been wary of Terry McLaurin in drafts this year because now his price is pumped up. Whereas I'm not sure he's a different player. He just has a better quarterback and is coming off a much better season. Jamison Williams, similarly, going much earlier this year than he was last year, despite some changes in an offense that still leans run and still has plenty of other guys around. So a couple of guys that I'm not necessarily targeting among that group. What do you think of those?
Yeah, I'm with you. McLaurin was burning us all year last year as far as, where he sat in our weekly rankings because he just kept scoring touchdowns. I think that's bound to regress this season, especially with Deebo Samuel added to the mix here. Jamison Williams is a tough one for me when it comes to best ball in particular because, I look at his profile. He, I think, in general, is going to be a guy who's more valuable in best ball more seasons than not in his career. But there's still going to be volatility within seasons with Jamison Williams. He's the type of guy where if just two of those, deep balls don't connect, that could be the difference between him being a good pick in best ball and a poor pick in best ball. So I think to me, Williams is very ADP dependent in best ball. I think in some drafts where he falls past ADP, he's a solid pick, but he's definitely not someone I want to go reaching for because I think he does have a pretty wide range of outcomes.
Agreed. And then on the other hand, Jackson Smith and Jigba, you talk about him underperforming in best ball value versus the way he scored. I would try not to overrate his lack of touchdowns last year and instead hone in on the fact that he led in targets on a team that still had DK Metcalf at that point, still had Tyler Lockett. All of a sudden, the second year guy took over, and expect the touchdowns to catch up to that usage as opposed to worrying about him having a lower ceiling going forward.
Yeah, definitely a fair point about the touchdowns. I would say, with JSN, the other issue is the average target depth, and it did climb from 6.1 as a rookie to 8.7 yards last year, which is getting better. I think you'd like to see that come up a bit more. We could and probably will at some point do a pretty lengthy discussion just on JSN and that Seahawks offense in general, because there's a lot of changes, obviously, with a new quarterback, with a new offensive coordinator, with Cooper Kupp getting added to the mix. So I think how the Seahawks choose to deploy Jackson Smith and Jigba this year will go a long way towards determining his value in best ball.
Yeah, lots more to talk about on individual player levels and, about all this stuff as we move through the spring and then the summer. We're going to keep hitting you twice a week here all year. So if you're digging the info, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'll hit best ball, straight redraft, dynasty, even IDP content every once in a while. And if you're not on YouTube or you just don't want to see my big forehead anymore and you want to still get the info, subscribe or follow to your favorite audio podcast platform. We appreciate your support. We also love to hear from you in the comments here or via social media. So be sure to check in with either agreements or disagreements. Love people saying how much we're helping them. I also enjoy when people try to tear us down for player takes. I can't speak for Jared on that front, but I enjoy it when people fire that stuff at me.
You need to be torn down a little bit, Matt.
We all do. If you give advice for a living, then you should definitely have people chipping away at your advice, whether it's beforehand and it's something that, hasn't been decided yet, or afterward, like, hey, didn't you like that guy? And you can either own it, explain it away, or hide from it, I guess.
For sure.
Tight ends, top 5 overall. Trey McBride, George Kittle, Brock Bowers, David Njoku, Jonnu Smith had the most best ball scoring value at the position last year. Jared, any takeaways from that group?
I want to mention Trey McBride first, because he's one of those guys where every time I uncover something else about his 2024 season, it gets more impressive. And to me, this is another thing where, leading tight ends in best ball scoring value, despite scoring just 3 touchdowns, is just super impressive. McBride led the position with 13 top 12 scoring weeks. Also led the position with 8 top 5 scoring weeks, again, despite just scoring very few touchdowns, right? He had 0 receiving touchdowns until week 17 last year. So just super exciting how good he was. And you can bet there's going to be more touchdowns coming in 2025. So that's exciting. George Kittle finishing tight end 2 here. Not a big surprise. I will say, though, this was his best season in terms of best ball scoring value since 2019. So no signs of decline from George Kittle. I think, people might be wary of drafting him this year because of the age and the previous injuries, but especially in best ball, Kittle still super value. And then David Njoku coming in 4th here. I just think he's a really good value in drafts right now. I think the fact that he missed some time last year sort of has him a bit undervalued. 4th most valuable tight end in terms of best ball scoring value. He had 6 top 12 scoring weeks among his 11 games. He had 5 top 5 scoring weeks among his 11 games. So he showed a nice ceiling last year. And as we talked about with Jerry Jeudy on our last podcast, there are plenty of targets available in Cleveland right now. We'll see what they add to the wide receiver room in the draft. But, as it stands right now, I think, Njoku pretty clearly a top 2 option in that passing game.
Yeah, I think there's less that we can get from Jonnu Smith here. There are going to be guys that did come out of nowhere like that, and it's rarely going to be the same kind of path. I think the main thing is find somebody who's going very late, who has something that you can point to as their reason for upside. Like maybe with Jonnu Smith, it was the Dolphins paying up at a position where they haven't typically paid up in free agency. That's not necessarily a target. Every year you'll get 2 guys the Jets signed simultaneously a few years ago that didn't pay off. So you get Hayden Hurst, like I did a couple years ago, who didn't pay off in Carolina. So it will definitely not work out. But the key there is drafting somebody so late that if they don't work out, you don't lose anything. The other 4 guys, I think, kind of work together to show what we can target in a tight end who we think has real ability to climb way up the rankings. And that is primarily somebody who can finish among his team's top 2 in targets. Njoku, Bowers, George Kittle, Trey McBride, all had that upside heading into the season. I think that for George Kittle is probably the one where you could say had the least chance of doing that because of how many players were on his team. But, the reason he had such a good season was because Brandon Ayuk went down, Deebo Samuel missed some time, Christian McCaffrey missed time. So, in that case, good player, handcuff possibilities, and not going too early in drafts. But in general, if you want to target upside at tight end, whether it's earlier or later, find a guy that has that path to be among his team's top 2 in targets.
For sure. And I think Kittle's even kind of in the Mike Evans mold where he's just been so efficient for so long that you can kind of project that, above average efficiency for him. But yeah, I'm with you, Matt. In general, guys who have a chance to, like you said, be number 2 on their team in targets, see triple-digit targets in the coming season. Those are the types that I think have potential to, overperform in best ball.
Yeah, Kittle's kind of like Patrick Mahomes. Like if he's going too early, pass on him. If he's not going too early, grab him because the good stuff is always possible. What'd you find among the outliers at tight end?
The biggest positive outlier at tight end in terms of being more valuable in best ball than, just straight up points per game was Mike Gesicki. He was 19th among tight ends in points per game, 17th in best ball scoring value. Probably not a surprise if you followed Gesicki last year because he had some monster games. He had 3 top 5 scoring weeks that was tied for 7th most at the position. Now, of course, we got to be careful with Gesicki because most of those top 5 scoring weeks came in games when T. Higgins was out. I think he had 2 games late in the season that were top 5 scoring level without T. Higgins, but otherwise he's almost like a T. Higgins handcuff in a way, right? But I do think in best ball, though, the fact that he has that upside and we know T. Higgins' injury history, I do think Gesicki is still worth targeting in best ball now that we know he's back in Cincinnati. On the negative side, 2 guys, unfortunately, that I actually kind of like this year, but were really disappointing in best ball. Jake Ferguson and Dalton Kincaid. Kincaid especially 20th among tight ends in total PPR points per game, but just 32nd in best ball scoring value. Neither of those guys had a single top 5 week last year. I think that partly speaks to their role in the offense. Both guys are low ADOT guys. Neither has been a big touchdown scorer throughout their careers, but I think there were also injury issues for both guys last year. Kincaid was banged up for a lot of the year. Ferguson missed some time. His quarterback missed a bunch of time. So it's worth noting. It's not going to necessarily take me off either guy in 2025 best ball drafts.
Yeah, and I think, price is still key there. We'll see exactly where Kincaid and Ferguson settle. Ferguson's been one of my top targets at the position because, as you mentioned, Dak Prescott missed a lot of time last year. Jake Ferguson also missed some time last year. So he was really set up to fail versus beginning season expectation. Dalton Kincaid still has to get a bit more target share and get downfield a bit more for my taste to have the upside, but as long as he's going outside the top 12, I'm fine with him. And then Mike Gesicki re-signed with the Bengals, so he's now Joe Burrow's number 3 wide receiver, basically. Mm-hmm. So as long as he's not going too early, I think he'll be fine. We'll see exactly how he coexists with T. Higgins. Through most of the last year, like you said, it was if Higgins is on the field, Mike Gesicki's a ghost, and if Higgins is out, then Gesicki's startable. So that change for the final 2 weeks, I want to see whether the final 2 weeks were a blip or the Bengals finally figured out that they could actually use both guys at the same time.
And I think Gesicki's an example of, he's not going to finish top 2 on his team in targets, but 3rd on a super pass heavy team like the Bengals is kind of as good as, being number 2 on a, more balanced offense.
Another guy, Cole Kmet, for this coming year, not for what he did last year, but I think he has that upside case that we were talking about with tight ends in general. First, there is the depressed draft price versus last year. And second, he's in this offense with a quarterback heading into his 2nd season, didn't play especially well last year. They have a new head coach who's coming from a dynamic offense in Detroit over the past few years. So you can take a modest bet on Cole Kmet right now, who the Bears already paid big money to, who has been involved in the offense, who was kind of all over the place in his usage last year under Shane Waldron, who has an unhealthy obsession with Gerald Everett. So a lot of the negatives are gone now, and we have this modest price on Kmet. To me, he's a low-level bet on just kind of everything in Chicago getting better this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in on Chicago's passing game. That definitely includes Cole Kmet. Disappointing last year, basically in any fantasy format, including best ball. But just go back to 2023, he had a 1.70 best ball scoring value. In 2024, that would have been the 10th best mark among tight ends. So I definitely think he's capable of getting back to that level if this offense takes a step forward this year.
If you are drafting best ball teams right now, or even just thinking about doing so, we've got plenty for you on draftsharks.com. Best ball rankings, best ball strategy, my first best ball draft recap from this year, more best ball content on the way, including the guys that I've been targeting most in my draft so far. And of course, you can sync your draft war room with your best ball drafting right now to incorporate things like best ball factor, upside mode, and stack finder, which we didn't talk about, but that helps you find those teammates that can boost the value of individual picks on your best ball roster. So you can incorporate all those things into your team building with the best ball draft war room. Our goal with all of it, of course, is to make sure that Draft Sharks is your unfair advantage.